He hadn't touched a woman in 7 years. Now the first one to fall into his arms was nearly destroyed. Ethan Westbrook didn't expect much from life anymore. He lived quiet and alone up in those dry Arizona hills with nothing but the wind and the weight of memories he never talked about. He had a cabin, a Winchester rifle, and regrets older than the pines around him. But that day, everything changed. The sound of distant gunfire echoed across the valley as Ethan tracked a deer through the underbrush. 2 shots, not his. The animal bolted, and Ethan cursed under his breath. Hunters crossing his property again. He turned toward the sound when something else caught his attention. Movement down by the ravine. A woman emerged from the tree line, stumbling, barely staying upright. Her clothes were torn to shreds, leaving her with nothing but a dirty piece of white cloth wrapped around her body. Her bare feet were bloody, her arms scraped raw, her eyes wild with terror. Behind her, voices shouted, men's voices, angry and determined. "Find her! Blackwood wants her alive!" The woman glanced over her shoulder, lost her footing, and tumbled down the steep embankment. She didn't even scream as she fell, landing in a motionless heap at the bottom of the ravine. Ethan moved without thinking, scrambling down the rocky slope toward her. He knelt beside her, checking for a pulse, still alive. Her breathing was shallow, her skin hot with fever. As he tried to lift her, the cloth slipped from her shoulders, and what Ethan saw made his stomach turn. Her back was a canvas of cruelty, burns, lash marks, and deep twisted scars forming strange symbols and letters. Someone had branded her like cattle, written their ownership into her flesh. Ethan's jaw clenched so tight it hurt. His hand instinctively moved to the old knife scar on his own ribs. He'd seen marks like these before, at Gettysburg on slaves freed from southern plantations, property tags carved into human skin. "No one's going to hurt you anymore," he whispered, his voice rough with a fury he thought he'd buried years ago. He wrapped his hunting jacket around her, gentle as handling a wounded bird, and lifted her into his arms. The voices were getting closer. A dog barked. Ethan moved quickly through the brush, carrying her toward the only safe place he knew. Home. The cabin stood solitary against the fading daylight, simple but sturdy. Inside was sparse, a table, 2 chairs, a wood stove, a single bed against the wall. But what caught the eye were the weapons. A Winchester 73 mounted above the fireplace, a Colt single-action army on the table, hunting knives arranged by size on a rack, and a sharpshooter's medal framed but dusty in the corner. Next to it, a faded photograph of 5 men in Union blue, faces young and unmarked by what would come. Ethan laid the woman on his bed, moving methodically as he gathered water, cloth, and the whiskey he kept for medicinal purposes. He cleaned her wounds in silence, each one telling its own story of suffering. Some were fresh, others had healed badly months ago. The fever worried him most, infection setting in. As night fell, she stirred restlessly, murmuring pleas to unseen tormentors. "No more. Please. I can't." Ethan kept watch from his chair, rifle across his lap, eyes moving between the woman and the window. Something told him those men wouldn't give up their search easily. The darkness outside seemed to press against the glass. The wind shifted and Ethan tensed, listening. Nothing but coyotes in the distance. That night the dream came again. Gettysburg, the wheat field, the Confederate officer in his sights, then the young drummer boy stepping into view. The choice he made, the lives he took, 53 confirmed. How many unconfirmed? He woke with a gasp, hand reaching for his rifle. The woman was awake, watching him with fevered eyes. "You're him too," she whispered. "The ghost in the dark." "Rest," Ethan said, unnerved by her words. "You're safe." Near midnight, she woke fully, eyes wide with panic. "Where?" She tried to sit up but collapsed back with a groan. "You're safe," Ethan said, keeping his distance. My land. My cabin. She clutched the blanket he'd covered her with, eyes darting around the room, lingering on the weapons. Water? He offered, holding out a cup. She hesitated, then reached for it with shaking hands. After drinking, she fixed him with a stare both wary and direct. What do you want from me? Nothing, Ethan replied. Just for you to be safe. She didn't believe him. He could tell. But exhaustion won out, and she drifted back to sleep, one hand still clutching the blanket like it might be snatched away. By the second day, the fever broke. She told him her name was Sarah Mitchell, that she'd been traveling west when her stagecoach was ambushed 3 months ago. The rest came out in pieces throughout the day. How she'd been taken to a hidden silver mine run by Maxwell Blackwood, a man whose name was whispered with fear across 3 territories. They take people no one will miss, Sarah explained, sitting at the table wrapped in Ethan's spare shirt that hung like a dress on her thin frame. Immigrants, drifters, women traveling alone. They work them until they break. And the marks? Ethan asked, nodding toward her back. Sarah's eyes darkened. Blackwood's son, Jake, he likes to leave his mark. Says it helps him remember which ones are his favorites. She paused, her fingers tracing an invisible pattern on the table. His father knows. Doesn't stop him. Says it keeps us from running. Who'd take in someone marked like that? Ethan's hand tightened around his coffee cup until his knuckles went white. You escaped before? Twice. First time they broke my arm. Second time, she trailed off, hand unconsciously moving to her back. This was my 3rd attempt. I didn't think I'd make it. How'd you get out this time? Sarah's eyes met his, something like pride flickering behind the fear. I'm good with locks. My father was a locksmith in Boston, before they killed him for his watch. After breakfast, Ethan took her outside, handed her his Colt. Ever fired one of these? He asked. Sarah shook her head. Time to learn. He positioned her hands, explained how to aim, how to breathe. Don't pull the trigger. Squeeze it, like you're trying not to wake someone. She fired, missing the can he'd set up by a good foot. Again, he said. By the 10th shot, she hit it. The satisfaction in her eyes was worth the spent ammunition. Back inside, Ethan shared just enough of himself to balance her revelations. Former Union Army sharpshooter, served under Grant, came west after the war to escape the memories. 53 confirmed kills, he said flatly. I don't want to talk about it. That night, the nightmare returned. This time he was shouting when he woke, drenched in sweat. Sarah stood in the doorway between rooms watching him. I get them too, she said simply. Different monsters, same darkness. Something in the way she said it, not with pity but recognition, made Ethan nod slowly. She understood. She'd seen her own ghosts. The sound of approaching horses came 3 days after Sarah arrived. Ethan was outside, showing her how to set a simple rabbit trap. He straightened, hand moving to the knife at his belt. Inside, he said quietly. Under the bed there's a loose board. Crawl space beneath. Go. Sarah moved without question, disappearing into the cabin. 2 riders approached, a young man in an expensive vest with cold eyes and a weathered hand with a shotgun across his saddle. A bloodhound trotted alongside them, nose to the ground. Afternoon, the young man called, a smile that didn't reach his eyes plastered across his face. Name's Jake Blackwood. Looking for a runaway. Woman, about 25. Brown hair. Pretty, despite the marks. Ethan stood motionless on his porch, one hand resting casually near his holstered Colt. Haven't seen anyone in weeks. The bloodhound reached the porch steps, sniffing eagerly. Ethan's heart pounded. 2 days ago, he'd had Sarah soak her clothes in deer blood, then bury them a mile east, a hunter's trick. Jake's eyes narrowed as the dog whined, trotting toward the deer trail. Mind if we take a look around? She's company property, stole some valuable items when she left. This is my land, Ethan said evenly. You're not welcome to search it. Jake's hand twitched toward his gun, but something in Ethan's stance made him reconsider. You know, Jake said, eyes narrowing, you look familiar. Weren't you at Fort Bridger last spring, when that Pinkerton got his throat cut? Never been to Wyoming, Ethan lied smoothly. The dog barked, pulling east. We'll be back, Jake spat, yanking his horse around, with more men. My father doesn't take kindly to thieves, or those who harbor them. Your father should teach you better manners, Ethan replied calmly, and to stay off private property. The threat hung in the air between them as Jake wheeled his horse around. 2 days, he called over his shoulder, then we burn you out. After they disappeared down the trail, Ethan went inside. Sarah was already emerging from the hiding place, face pale. The dog, she whispered. The deer blood worked. Ethan nodded. For now. They'll be back, she said, trembling slightly. I should go. They'll kill you. Ethan shook his head. They'll try. He checked his Colt, then reached for the old cavalry saber on the wall. We've got work to do. That evening, Ethan showed Sarah a hidden cellar beneath the cabin floor. If things go wrong, this is your refuge. Lock it from inside. There's water, food, a spare pistol. He positioned a small mirror on a shelf. This gives you a view through that crack. You can see the whole room. And this, he pointed to a narrow firing port near the foundation, gives you a clear shot at anyone coming through that door. Who taught you all this? Sarah asked. War, Ethan said simply. Then, a man named Reed, Marshall now, old friend from Shiloh. Ethan handed her a folded paper. This explains everything. If I don't make it, find him in Silver Creek. Next morning, an old trapper named Hanson stopped by to trade. Ethan slipped him a message, along with a silver dollar for his trouble, but Hanson refused the coin. Keep it, the old man growled. I ain't forgot Antietam. You saved my boy. For the next 2 days, Ethan prepared. He set simple alarms around the perimeter. Tin cans on strings, trip wires that would send rocks clattering down slopes. He dug shallow pits disguised with branches in the likely approach routes. He cleaned every weapon, counted ammunition, and positioned supplies for quick access. He showed Sarah how to use the terrain, where to run if separated, how to navigate by stars, how to find water in dry country, how to recognize the signs of men tracking her. Why are you doing this? She asked on the second night as they cleaned guns by lamplight. You don't know me. Ethan paused, the cloth stilling on the barrel of his Winchester. In the flickering light, his face looked carved from stone. I know what it's like to be hunted, he said finally, and I know what men like Blackwood deserve. Sarah studied him for a long moment. You've killed men like him before. It wasn't a question, but Ethan answered anyway. Yes. Good, she said, and returned to loading shells. They came at dusk on the third day, 6 riders approaching from the west, silhouetted against the setting sun. Maxwell Blackwood led them, a large man with a silver beard and cold eyes that must have passed to his son. Jake rode beside him, along with 4 hired guns, with the hard look of men who killed for pay. Westbrook, Maxwell's voice boomed across the clearing. Send out the woman and we'll leave you be. Harbor a thief and you burn with her. Ethan stood in the doorway, rifle resting in the crook of his arm. Sarah was already in the cellar, the trap door concealed beneath a rug and table. There's no one here but me, Ethan called back. This is my land. You're trespassing. Maxwell's laugh was like stones grinding together. Jake, show him we mean business. Jake raised a burning torch, grinning as he spurred his horse toward the woodpile stacked against the side of the cabin. One of the hired guns followed, another torch in hand. Ethan didn't hesitate. The Winchester cracked, and Jake's horse screamed, shot through the shoulder. Horse and rider went down in a tangle of limbs. The second man's torch flew from his hand as Ethan's next shot caught him in the arm. Then all hell broke loose. Bullets splintered the door frame as Ethan ducked back inside. He moved to a prepared firing position at the window, picking off another rider who tried to circle behind the cabin. The Winchester roared again and again, each shot placed with deadly precision. He'd been the best shot in Grant's army, and his aim hadn't faltered with age. Outside, Maxwell was shouting orders. Two men dismounted, using their horses as shields as they approached. They worked their way toward the cabin in short rushes, bullets kicking up dirt around Ethan's position. A bottle crashed through the window, kerosene, its fuse already lit. The cabin floor erupted in flames. Ethan stomped out the fire, but another bottle followed. Smoke began filling the cabin as the dry wood caught. Through the haze, he saw Jake limping toward the cabin, pistol raised. Ethan's rifle clicked empty. No time to reload. A shot rang out, not Ethan's. Jake stumbled, clutching his leg. From beneath the cabin, through the firing port Ethan had shown her, Sarah had taken her shot. Maxwell, enraged at seeing his son wounded, charged toward the cabin, firing wildly. His bullet creased Ethan's temple, sending him staggering back. Blood trickled into his eye as he struggled to aim his reloaded Winchester. Through the smoke and blood, Ethan squeezed the trigger. Maxwell tumbled from his saddle, clutching his shoulder. The remaining hired guns, seeing their employer down, began to retreat. But Maxwell, blood soaking his expensive coat, was screaming for them to burn everything to the ground. The smoke was getting thicker. Ethan could hear Sarah coughing below the floorboards. They were trapped. "Sarah!" he shouted through the floorboards. "The east window! Go now!" Then came a sound that changed everything. A shout from the tree line, followed by organized gunfire. "U.S. Marshal! Drop your weapons!" Three riders emerged from the forest, rifles raised. The lead man wore a silver star on his chest. The hired guns, seeing the odds shift, immediately threw down their weapons. Marshal Logan Reed dismounted slowly, approaching Maxwell with his rifle trained on the wounded man's chest. "Maxwell Blackwood," he announced formally, "you're under arrest for kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and murder." Maxwell, still clutching his bleeding shoulder, spat in the dirt. "You got nothing on me. Lawman." "Got 20 witnesses says different," Reed replied coolly. "Your mine's finished, Blackwood. So are you." Jake, pale from blood loss, made no resistance as a deputy handcuffed him. "Been watching Blackwood for months," Logan explained later, as they stood watching the smoldering remains of Ethan's cabin. "That mine of his ain't just illegal. It's a hellhole. We freed over 20 people yesterday, but Sarah here was the only one missing." Sarah, wrapped in a blanket, wiped tears from her eyes. "Are they safe? The others?" Logan nodded. "Safe as can be, and they're all willing to testify. Blackwood and his boy are looking at a long stretch in Yuma prison if they don't hang first." "They should hang," Sarah said quietly, her eyes hard. Ethan surveyed the charred timbers that had been his home for 7 years. Everything gone, except what mattered. "You can come stay in town until you sort things out," Logan offered. "Both of you." Sarah looked at Ethan. "What will you do now?" Ethan gazed at the ruins, then up at the hills he'd called home. "Build again, I suppose." "Alone?" she asked quietly. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Two broken people who had found in each other something worth fighting for. Logan watched them, a knowing look in his weathered face. "You know, Ethan," he said, "I've been telling you for years you needed someone watching your back." "Maybe I just needed the right person," Ethan replied. A month later, a new cabin stood where the old one had burned. Larger, with a proper porch and 2 rooms instead of 1. Ethan and Sarah stood outside, the morning sun warming their faces. "Try again," Ethan said, nodding toward the row of cans he'd set up at the edge of the clearing. Sarah raised the Winchester to her shoulder, his old rifle, now hers. She drew a deep breath, steadied her stance as he taught her, and squeezed the trigger. The furthest can flew off the fence post. Good, Ethan said. Then, surprising them both, he smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes, perhaps the first in 7 years. Sarah lowered the rifle, studying his face. You should do that more often. What? Smile. Looks good on you. They didn't name what was growing between them. They didn't need to. Some things were understood without words, like how sometimes the person who heals you is the one who needed healing themselves. Inside the cabin, a letter lay unopened on the table. It had arrived yesterday from a lawyer in San Francisco. The return address read Cornelius Blackwood, Esquire. What they didn't know was that Maxwell Blackwood had an older brother, a man far more dangerous than Maxwell ever was, a man with connections stretching from San Francisco to Washington, D.C., and he was already on his way to Arizona with vengeance on his mind and hired killers at his back. Sometimes the hardest battles come just when you think the war's over. But for now, in the golden morning light, Ethan Westbrook stood beside the woman who had saved him as surely as he had saved her. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, the ghosts were quiet. The dust settled over the Arizona hills as Ethan and Sarah stood together, watching the sunset from their new porch. The cabin behind them wasn't much, but it was theirs. A fortress built not just with timber and nails, but with second chances. Folks, I've been sharing these frontier tales for nigh on 7 years now, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the strongest people aren't those who never fall. They're the ones who learn to stand back up. Ethan Westbrook carried the weight of his past like iron shackles until a woman with scars deeper than his own showed him that sometimes protecting someone else is the best way to save yourself. But let me ask you something. How many Ethans are out there right now? Men who've withdrawn from life, living in the shadows of what they once were? And how many Sarahs are fighting battles that seem impossible to win? Sometimes all it takes is one person standing their ground, one moment of courage, one decision not to look away when the world has turned its back. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. This old cowboy's got plenty more tales where this came from. Stories of honor, courage, and redemption that don't get told much anymore. Next week, we'll ride with Cornelius Blackwood as he arrives in Arizona territory with blood in his eyes and the law in his pocket. A man who built his fortune in the California gold rush through means that would make even his brother Maxwell shudder. This is Thomas Ryder, reminding you that even in our modern world, we could all use a little more of that frontier spirit, that grit that built this nation one hardship at a time. Subscribe now, ring that bell, and I'll meet you back here next Thursday. Until then, keep your powder dry and your conscience clear.